Good evening, everyone. This is the Black Post. This evening, the message will be sent. Tonight, we'll be talking about Black education empowerment and how we need to understand that Black education empowerment is very important to our society and also the Black community. Now, as we look upon a question that comes to mind in history, whether or not the subject is to enslave people, is that during the time of 1863, if you was a free man in the North, it would be legal for him to read. But what if he was not free? Or what if he was a free Black man residing in a slave state? The issue of literacy among Blacks during the Civil War was a complicated one. Before the 1830s, there was few restrictions on teaching slaves to read and write. After the slave revolt led by Nat Turner in 1831, all slave states except for Maryland, Kentucky, and Tennessee passed laws against teaching slaves to read and write. See, during slavery times prior to 1863, 1865 ratified that no slave was to be taught how to read and write, no matter where they resided. See, in 1831 and 1832, statutes were passed in Virginia prohibiting meetings to teach free Blacks to read or write and instituting a fine of $10 to $100 for teaching enslaved Blacks. We also must point out the Alabama Slave Code. The Alabama Slave Code of 1833 included the following law: any person who shall attempt to teach any free person of color or slave to spell, read, or write shall, upon conviction thereof by indictment, be fined in the sum of not less than $250. And we understand back in the 1800s, $250 was more like $250,000. No more than $500 at this time. Harper's Weekly published an article that stated, the alphabet is an abolishment. If you will keep a people enslaved, refuse to teach them to read, there was fear that slaves who were literate could forget travel passes and escape. These passes signed by their slave owners were required for enslaved people traveling from one place to another and usually included the date on which the slave was supposed to return. There was also fear their writing could be a means of communication that would make it easier to plan insurrection and mass escape. See, the reason why they kept us illiterate, retarded, stupid, and dumb was to keep us enslaved so that we could not run away. So we couldn't forge documents in order to forge our own freedom. Because when you was a freeman, that's what they called them, they forged their own documents when they could read and write. So this was prohibited to teach slaves how to read, write, and spell. Because if you can do that, you could essentially write your own pass. You could essentially write your own freedom document. Now, we must understand that slave narratives from many sources tell us many enslaved people became educated. Some learned to read from other literate slaves, while at other times a master or mistress were willing to teach a slave in defiance of the laws. Former slave and abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass was taught that the alphabet in secret at age 12 by his master's wife, Sophia. As he grew older, Douglass took charge of his own education. I mean, he obtained and reading newspapers and books in secret. He was often quoted asserting that knowledge is the pathway from slavery to freedom. Douglass was one of the few literate slaves who regularly taught others how to read. I mean, younger slaves frequently listened outside schoolhouses where their masters and children were learning. They will stand by the door of their master's quarters and listen. We understand that enslaved people, our ancestors, and we're the descendants of the people, if they were caught reading or writing, they were severely punished, as well as their teachers. I mean, in every instance, these slaves and those who taught them undertook a profound risk, which for many were surmounted by the individual's passions, commitment, and imagination. So from the dawn of time, family, this is all by design for us to be the most uneducated group in the world, whether it be here in America, the Caribbean, Africa, or the UK. In the entire African diaspora, we're only feeding into the hands of white supremacy, but not teaching ourselves as well as our kids how to read and write. You have a duty. You have a purpose to teach your kids how to read and write, how to spell, how to comprehend. But it does not stop there, because education not executed upon is futile. It means nothing to our race. We have to understand the way that the world is moving. And just like any other educated group, and let's just point out the Asians for a second here. Asians, when I was in Korea, they went to school all year round. See, in America, we take around 2 months off. And I believe that we need to push our kids during the summertime to read a couple of books, to do a few math algorithms and figure out things in critical thinking. And when they start getting to the age of 7, 8, and 9, we need to talk really hard to steer them to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Whether they're going to be a lawyer or a doctor, because first and foremost, we need more Black doctors. We don't need more Black nurses. We need more Black doctors. We need more Black lawyers, and we need more of our young men and women inside of STEM. We need more computer applicators, software engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, scientists, technologists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need these things, but it starts with the base of education, because a lot of you are not attending to your kids and their education. You have no idea what level your kid reading level is on, neither their math. This is the huge problem in the Black community, because we have so many things that go against us. We have so many issues that we're fighting. Inequality, no justice, police brutality, racial discrimination, racial profiling. The list goes on and on and on. Nutrition inequalities, the lack of Medicare, the lack of resources, the lack of community centers. I mean, our problems in our community are extensive. But the one thing that we can do is teach our kids reading and math. See, you may not be but you're probably better than that teacher who is supported by the system of white supremacy. And I'm not saying all schools are like this, but believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, the majority of your schools that your Black kids go to are underfunded. They're ran down, they're in shambles, they don't have the resources they need. So they cannot compete with their white, Asian, and Hispanic counterparts. So you have to do your due diligence and go get your child the materials, the books, and the tools they need, not only to survive, but to thrive and level up. If you're not doing this, then you're serving a great injustice to your children. Your children will be on the wayside and you're wondering, oh, you just need to study hard and do this, do that. And that doesn't work. They need your guidance. They need your help. They need your assistance. This is the problem of our community. There's a lot of things that we can do. I mean, when you really think about it, many people still think that racism is no longer a problem in America. I mean, think about it. After the election of President Obama, some academics argued that racism in America is for all intents and purposes dead, simply because a non-foundational Black American got elected. What I mean by that is Barack Obama is not a foundational Black American. He doesn't have the Black experience. He never grew up in any inner city, any impoverished city. His mother's from Kansas and his father is from Kenya. He grew up part of his life in Indonesia, the other part in Hawaii. He never grew up in none of the major cities or around any of the major cities like LA, Seattle, Detroit, Baltimore, states like Florida or Texas, DC, New York. He didn't grow up in any of those. So, I mean, and when you really think about it, was he truly the first Black president? No, he was the first biracial president that we could essentially prove. Then Kamala Harris is the second biracial president. We have yet to have a Black president because whites can claim Obama too. You can argue that all you want, but both of his parents are not Black. The prominent conservative scholar and African-American economist Tom Sowell said, he has argued that racism isn't dead, but it is on life support. I mean, Harvard professors, William Julius Wilson, and what's the other guy's name? Roland Fryer, they argued about the declining significance of race and discrimination. We now know this to be false. Because when Trump came into office, and a lot of people would like to believe that Trump incited riots and insurrections, did he put fuel to the flame? Or did he just rip off the Band-Aid from an open wound? I'll let you decide. But as we wind down the final months thinking about Obama's presidency, the declining significance of race and discrimination narratives seem to be at odds with the lived realities for Black Americans. I mean, President Obama himself has faced racism treatment, such as the birther controversy and a member of Congress, mostly coming from Donald Trump. And then one incident after another has highlighted the painful reality that Black men are disproportionately likely to die at the hands of the police in comparison to any other demographic group. So education is broader than what you think. You have to educate your kids on police brutality. You have to educate your kids on the laws of this land and how that when you encounter a police, they're not subject to their laws because they can get off with impunity, with immunity. I mean, sadly to say, racism and discrimination are facts of life for many Black Americans. I mean, for us, it doesn't matter who studies the history of inequalities and injustice of our race. But we need to understand that higher education is not the root of all equity gaps, but it can be a vehicle to lessen those gaps, and it starts with your damn kids. Historically, it has not been. Equity gaps between students based on their race, ethnicity, and income persist and thrive at most institutions. I mean, for Black students, our Black hopefuls, simply accessing higher education remains difficult, partially at four-year colleges and at some institutions, including public flagship and research universities. Access has worsened for Black students in recent years. We're still doing horribly bad in school. Most of our kids are reading 2 grades lower than their counterparts. Almost 3 to 4 at the algorithmic rate in math. I mean, until real progress is made on the issue, among others, higher ed leaders calls for diversity and inclusion, public statements on social racism, and decisions to change building names or remove statues with racist legacies will continue to reign supreme in our communities unless we take charge, unless we take hold. Yes, you don't have a lot of money. Yes, you don't have a lot of resources. Yes, you can do something about it. I don't care if you work 8 to 16 hours a day. The one thing that you have an obligation and a duty to are your kids, and make sure that they have the nourishment and education that they need to survive in this land. Because when you send your kids off in this system of white supremacy to school, have you noticed all the news lately about all these teachers saying the most racist things, thinking they're off the Zoom camera? You see how the energy in the universe works? You see how how this pandemic has really shined a light on the racism in education? Have you guys seen that Texas passed a bill not to teach discrimination, racism, and sexism in schools? Look it up. Texas is no longer teaching racism, sexism, and discrimination in school. They're not teaching about slavery. This is one of the bills that they passed, I believe, this week. And if your kids do not know their history, they're not going to understand why they've been discriminated upon. This is very important. I'm not telling you to teach them their history just about slavery. See, we need to teach our kids the good and the bad. We need to teach them where they derive from a great continent called Africa. This is not for the weak at heart. This is not for the weak at heart. You have to teach them where they come from and how do they land in this country of white supremacy. They may even want to know, what are you doing to combat it? Well, the first thing you can tell them is, I'm educating you on the situation and the environment that you're growing up in. See, growing up, I didn't have that experience. The only thing I was told is, oh, that's white people stuff. Don't worry about it. That's white people stuff. Well, what do you mean white people stuff? Because my family too were uneducated. This is our duty. If you're not teaching your kids these tools, these skills of survival, they will surely die in the streets. See, we need to teach them how to handle the police, what to do, what to say. Now, they have a higher chance of survival versus an untaught Black kid. See, family, what we need to understand is that slowly but surely, we either be a Democratic state or a Democratic state or a Republican state or independent state, doesn't matter what state it is. The white supremacy reigned true. And that's why all this information is coming out about all of these teachers saying the most heinous things about our kids, calling them stupid, dumb, and ugly, and they're being caught. But see, if you don't think it's in your school system because you live in a Black city, well, let me tell you, if you got white representatives in that school, then you might want to think about it again. This is the veil that's on our eyes. See, when I saw this, I was not surprised. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised at all. Texas House passes bill targeting critical race theory over objections from education, civics, and business groups. So, with that said, what that simply means is that if you start off in a series of tweets earlier this month, Chud grouped the bill with red meat legislation that would impact voting abortion rights, saying that Republicans are finally getting some big wins for the base. Arguments in support of this bill echo former President Donald Trump, who created the since dismantled 1776 Commission to promote patriotic education. Patriotic education. It's kind of like that Black Nigerian who was running for governor in Michigan, how he wanted to change Black History Month to American History Month. They're trying to eradicate even Black History Month. See, I didn't hear them trying to eradicate Latino Heritage Month or Asian American Month. None of those other months, but Black History Month. And he was a Black Nigerian. But we understand that The coon class from Africa and the Caribbean is very large. I'm not saying all my brothers and sisters from the African continent and the Caribbean are coons, but there are a lot of them who support the system of white supremacy. I mean, even right here, it says that Texas legislation will prohibit teachers from receiving training that presents any form of race or sex stereotyping or blame, and it will ban them from teaching that an individual by virtue of individual race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously, or that someone should feel guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress due to their race. You know what that's saying, right, family? That's saying we're no longer going to teach about slavery. We're no longer going to teach about discrimination. We're no longer going to teach about white privilege. We're no longer going to teach those things in our school systems. See, it's easy when you don't know your history. It's easy when you don't know what occurs to your race. And believe it or not, because these things are not readily available with information, we don't believe it to be true. But it is. You know, I was talking to a buddy today, and we got into somewhat of a heated argument about this very same topic in one way or another. He voted for Joe Biden. I told him I didn't vote for anybody because none of them support Black people. See, he went with the whole lesser of two evils argument, whereas though that if we really talk about the situation, if he was educated on the situation, he would have known that Donald Trump was only divisive in words. He made no policies against Black Americans. He did not. Joe Biden did. And then when you bring up that argument, you know what they tell you? They say, well, that was such a long time ago. Now, was it? These are generations X mothers and fathers. That majority of our fathers was incarcerated because they were victims of the 3-strike rule. They were victims of mass incarceration. They were victims of the 86 anti-drug bill and the 1994 crime bill. They were victims because they over-policed our neighborhoods. And then the 3-letter agency, CIA, introduced, funded, and supplied crack cocaine into a low-income, low-impoverished, over-policed neighborhoods around the entire nation. See, when you learn about war strategies, the reason why we ran our tails out of Vietnam is because of jungle warfare, where it wasn't a frontal battle. It wasn't mano, face to face. No, what the Viet Cong did, they attacked us on all fronts. They attacked us from the underground. They attacked us from the left and the right and the rear. They attacked us in many different ways. And if you don't believe that our race is getting attacked, then I want you to wake up and understand that we are. I want you to understand that we're being attacked. And the one thing that you can do with the lack of resources, the lack of income, is help your kids to be educated on who and what they are and to prepare them for the next 10 to 20 years of their life. See, we can't just teach our kids about history. We can't just teach our kids about the atrocities that we've been through. We can't just teach our kids that we can't even start. First and foremost, we must become educated because a lot of us are not in the knowing. I want to ask the question, do we know about James Baldwin? Do we know about Neely Fuller? Do we know about John Henry Clark? Do we know about Dr. Claude Anderson? Do we know about Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King? See, we know about Martin Luther King because he was all about nonviolence. I won't really get on that, but anytime we start to bring up people who bring up Black nationalism, fighting for Black empowerment, the only thing they say, well, you guys had Martin Luther King. Dr. Claude Anderson, in his book, Dirty Little Secret, says, for Black people, the struggle for education was essentially to the struggle for freedom from slavery. They were aware that the national public policy opposed their learning. The policy was summarized in the words of a member of the Virginia House of Delegates who spoke of educating Black slaves in 1832, saying, "We have, as far as possible, closed every avenue by which light may enter their minds." Listen to this. This is on a federal level. And see, this is why history is so important, because us not learning, us being illiterate, us being deaf, dumb, and blind, we're not reading the information to translate this to our kids. See, this whole narrative of keeping our school system in the Black communities unfunded is by design. Because if you are low income and low educated, illiterate, and cannot comprehend, then guess who's the bottom class? Guess who are doing the jobs that nobody else wants to do? Guess who's working in all the Wendy's and Burger Kings and Popeyes? We are. And we're making them richer. So here's it again. The policy was summarized in the words of a member of the Virginia House of Delegates who spoke of educating Black slaves in 1832, saying, "We have, as far as possible, closed every avenue by which light may enter their minds." See, education is light because you can see a way out. It's a beacon of hope. It also states here, if we could extinguish, that means put out, if we could extinguish the capacity to see the light, our work would be completed. They would then be on a level with the beasts of the field, deaf, dumb, blind, and illiterate. That's what they said. They would be on the same level as beasts of the field, and we would be safe because we would be unintelligent. We won't learn strategies. We won't learn theories. We won't learn anything to help us to free ourselves from the enshacklement of our captors, of our enslavers. To them, to build wealth, see, they would use education to build wealth, power, and personal comfort. Colonel Frederick Douglass, master, upheld the policy when he stopped his wife from teaching Douglass. See, that was a slave masters of Frederick Douglass. In his letters to her, Colonel All argued that if you teach that nigger to read, there would be no keeping him. He will forever be unfit to be a slave. Because once you are educated, ladies and gentlemen, you understand all the options that you have. That's why education is so important. It says that Frederick Douglass and many other Blacks proved Colonel Aud right. The laws and policies could not quench Black people's desire to be literate. Even though becoming literate could result in death or their children being sold, many Blacks would not be denied. They sought out white friends, abolitionists, and anyone else willing to teach them. They were creative and resourceful. Some Black slaves manufactured their own pens and ink using chicken feathers and berry juice, then practice in secret. They were learning how to read and write and spell. Gus Fester, a white sympathizer, recalled how one Black slave creatively taught himself. He said that on Sundays and Saturdays, the slave would slip ball from white folks. He would cut out blocks for counting from bark on pine trees. He would use the sticks from oak trees for an ink pen and drop oak balls in water, which would turn into ink if left overnight. The slave preserved and eventually learned how to write his name, read, and do some figuring in math. Moke 9 says, prophetic noble Drew Ali. See, there's a lot of Black prominent people in our society that goes unnoticed. And the only person, if you notice, that the white supremacists put in front of us is Dr. Martin Luther King. You know why? Because he was nonviolent. They want to keep you docile. They don't want their criminal class, they don't want their low income class to rise up and actually fight for revolution, because we need to understand, and I hope that you know this, how did the Europeans conquer America from the Native Americans and from the Black Seminoles? How did they do that? By force. You've heard the term power is not given, it's taken. If you notice, everything that the Europeans conquered, they conquered with the use of force. They never came in and say, hey, we'll give you gold and silver for your land. No, when they went to Africa and colonized each and every country except probably about 2 or 3 that were free because they fought back, they took it by force. When they colonized the Caribbean, they took it by force. The only country that the Europeans, mainly the French, could not take was Haiti. If you look up the War of 1804, you will see how the Haitians killed each and every French person that was there. It took them years to mount a revolt, but nonetheless, they were damned to be enslaved. That's the only one true country that rose up and killed all of the slave masters. History, education, going forward is probably one of the most important things that we need to do in our community. I mean, early childhood education is an increasingly important aspect of American life. Predicting not only later school outcomes, but also career and work options, economic stability, health, and social opportunities. School performance constrains the future opportunities of us Black Americans. When we match for social class, the gap in educational achievement between Black Americans and other groups is substantial. Black American children on average score lower on tests and are given lower grades than Asian, white, and other Latino students. In adolescence, many of them fail courses and drop out of school. Others progress through school but do not excel. They are less often enrolled in honor courses in high school or accepted into competitive 4-year colleges. The achievement gap is a problem not only for Black American students and their families and community, it affects the well-being of the entire country. I mean, researchers have found that the persistence of educational achievement gap imposes on the United States economic equivalent of a permanent national recession. If we look at the past and present economic and social conditions, they are the root of the achievement gap. I mean, societal efforts to overcome the ill effects of prejudice and discrimination of Black Americans have not been effective enough. I mean, they continue to be inequality in almost every aspect of life, including education. I mean, at the same time, scientific and technological changes have raised the educational requirements for successful and fulfilling careers, placing an even greater burden on underserved communities and schools. And because social science research has focused primarily on group effects rather than the factors that have stemmed progress, it has provided few clues as to how to construct support system, even where there is a genuine wish to do so. Only by understanding these factors can our community, our teachers, our Black teachers, develop and implement the strategies needed to move from school failure to school success, increasing opportunities for life success for many more students. Although Black Americans, our children, people in our community, we are victims of racism and poverty. Now, each one of our communities around the US, we have our own unique issues, but one issue reigns supreme. It's the educational and lack of economic empowerment. We had the same challenges, But what we need to do is understand the differences and the similarities among the different communities and attend to those issues one by one. We don't have the resources. We don't have the economics. But the one thing that you can do for your children and for yourself is, first and foremost, know your history beyond slavery. Know your history beyond slavery. Know your history in and out of slavery. Not just understanding Jim Crow, but understanding all the Black mathematicians, all the Black astrologers, all the Black inventors and doctors, etc. We shouldn't just have our focus on education in one area. It should be a broad spectrum. And lastly, if you believe that a system that was oppressive to our people are willing to teach our people about them damn selves, then you are the biggest coon that I know. If you think you're going to send your son and your daughter off, and you believe that these racist school systems are going to teach them about themselves, first and foremost, let's just do the numbers. Majority of America is white. Majority of Americans are racist or discriminatory. So if you believe that when you send them off, they're going to know more about themselves and their history, no. Contraire, mi amor. They are going to learn more about white supremacy and thinking that white people reign supreme over them. We have to teach our kids our greatness. And we also have to prepare them for the future, regardless of they like it or not. I'm a huge advocate on pushing our kids in areas where we're going to need them the most. We need Black doctors, Black lawyers, Black engineers, Black mathematicians, Black scientists, and Black teachers. There's something you can do, and you have to do it. This is the Black Post. This evening, the message was sent. Whether you liked it or not, the message was delivered.